didn't enter until probably grade 4 or 5, and then took the remainder of my schooling there. Prior to that, I attended the local school in that tiny community that I mentioned.
And that was a...
And at that time, of course, there were no interpreters. 1960s, there weren't lots of interpreters at that time. So the teacher tried her best, you know, talking, writing on the board, gesturing, but each time, of course, she looked away. I had no access to communication. I had a small friend next to me, Carol, and she would sometimes do me the, you know, little 60-second blurb of here's what the teacher's saying. But it became harder and harder as the grades became more challenging. So then I went into the School for the Deaf, and that was a lovely impact. I mean, that really impacted me in terms of education and my own identity.
Okay. So, Wanda, have you, what have you been... You're a deaf interpreter. Okay. But before we talk about that, have you been in other businesses? What have you done for your career?
I've had 2 or 3 different work areas. I teach American Sign Language and have done so for many, many years. I would say probably 17 years, and I love the teaching.
Okay.
I teach ASL immersion classes, and that's a chance to impact families positively in learning communication. The other area that I have worked in as well, I work for Winnipeg Regional Health Authority. I was the first family home visit. So I worked in a program that supported hearing parents with deaf children, and so providing them with interpreter air. I worked with deaf parents primarily. Deaf parents were my focus, and I worked in an education role with them because the doctors rarely provide enough information, and there's rarely accessible information. So with a nurse, we would do that healthcare information. So why is it important to immunize? So families that had young children from birth to 5, and so on. So all of the issues that would be important for families who are raising parents, or raising children at that stage of their parenting. Very challenging.
Okay. And what prompted you to become a deaf interpreter?
I lived in the residence at the School for the Deaf, and I taught ESL part-time in one of my areas of life as well too, and I could certainly see that communication is one of those interesting aspects of dealing with somebody who has English as a second language. So for some of our students who moved when I worked, they moved from other countries where they'd never been in formal education. They had no sign language. And as a single parent, I've raised my own children. I know what language development looks like, and so I began working as a deaf interpreter based on that ESL experience.
And how long have you been a deaf interpreter, Wanda?
Since 1991,
Okay.
in Winnipeg primarily first.
Now, how long have you been living in Calgary? Or I'm assuming you live in Calgary?
Yes, it'll be 3 years this fall.
And would deaf interpretation be your job now, or is that something you do in addition to another job?
I do it occasionally. I wish it was my full-time day job. I wish that would be awesome.
Yeah.
I would be very excited if that was full-time during the day, because that would be lovely for people who immigrate here, or for young children, working with people who are deaf and blind, and deaf adults as well too. You can have a DI in many settings. If you think about going to a heart specialist, that can be a very challenging environment with lots of lexicon and vocabulary that's unfamiliar to people. And so, you know, there are all kinds of settings where DIs could work. So in the future, perhaps it'll be a full-time position.
What is your day job now then?
I work at Bow Valley College, BVC, Bow Valley College. I work as an intervener and a DI and an ASL tutor.
An intervener, I don't know what that is.
Right. So I do tactile sign language for people who are deaf and blind.
Thank you.
So I work as an intervener in a regular classroom at Bow Valley College, and that seems to be working out well. It's a bit of an experiment, but it's providing access, full access for a student who's deaf-blind.
A particular student, one student.
If there's 2 or 3, it depends on what their vision limitations are. So if they have low vision, and 2 of them have low vision, and they can see me close enough, great. But if they are both fully blind and require tactile interpretation, hand over hand, then that would require 2 interveners. And there are lots of different eye conditions that relate to the students. So it depends if the student has ushers, for example.
It depends if the student has ushers. Ushers? No.
Well,
I don't know what that is.
for somebody who has ushers, they may be able to see from a certain perspective. So if I think about from the nose up, they can see that area, but see nothing below.
Okay.
And so there are all kinds of varying eye conditions that can impact whether they can see an interpreter or whether they require hand over hand.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
What would you say the biggest challenge is for you at Bow Valley?
So you're working in.
I never thought about that before. I mean, I love every challenge that comes my way.
Oh yes.
I'd say funding, which really isn't, again, my problem, but it is a government issue, is with the government cuts in this province, we have students who need services and need access to education. My position is a contract position, and so that's not like a staff member who has some capital who can influence decisions, but
Okay.
I think that the college has been working very hard, and I've been trying to help them as much as possible to bring attention to access for deaf people.
Okay. On the other hand, what are you the most proud of as far as the work you've done, you know, either at Bow Valley or as a deaf interpreter in the community?
Yeah. Because we have.
Seeing the students or the clients, whether I'm as a DI or an intervener, succeed, that for me is the most inspiring aspect.
We have been going into firms and teaching a bit of sign language.
Now, because this is about DHHS and increasing awareness about the organization in the community, what would you say is one of the most important things that DHHS contributes to the community? Why should we care about this organization?
Yeah.
DHHS provides access, and without access, where would we be?
Yeah, no, but.
So their contribution to the community is that they're willing to hire deaf staff members, they're willing to support families with ASL immersions. I mean, those kinds of things ensure that community members are successful, and without them, that wouldn't be possible.
Okay. Wanda, if there's someone reading this insert, and final question, almost final question, 2 more questions. Reading this insert and, thank you, reading your story and maybe feel that they might want to be trained as a deaf interpreter, be a deaf young person wondering what they might want to do with their profession. What kind of guidance would you give them? What kind of message would you give them about that?
I'd say go for it. Go for it. You know, if you're interested and motivated, I'd be happy to talk with people because there are opportunities for DIs.
And is this a practice where we need more more deaf interpreters in